Hi everyone, welcome back to the Anna-losophy Podcast. Today we're continuing the series of My Philosophy, where I'll discuss ideas from different parts of life and connect them to bigger philosophical questions. And today I want to talk about something that pretty much all of us have: habits. Some habits are completely harmless, like checking your phone when you're bored, listening to the same songs, or following the same routine before bed. But needless to say, some are much less helpful, or maybe harmful. Maybe someone procrastinates, stays up later than they should, scrolls for hours, or keeps putting something off, even though they know it will make things harder later. And the strange thing, though, is that we usually know when we're doing it. For me, one obvious example is nail biting. I used to bite my nails a lot. And before you judge me, I know it might sound a little gross, but it was genuinely something I did without thinking ever since I was little. So how do habits form to begin with? If we know a habit isn't good for us, why don't we simply just stop doing it? And lastly, how much control do we actually have over our own behavior? That's what I want to explore today. So with that being said, let's go on to the 24th episode of the Anna-losophy Podcast. Before we uncover the philosophical aspects of habits and the other questions I have in store for this video, I think it's important to ask how habits form in the first place. Scientifically, a habit forms when we repeat the same behavior over and over until our brain starts doing it with less thought. At first, we usually make a clear choice to do something, but after enough repetition, the brain learns the pattern and starts treating it almost like a shortcut. A simple way to understand this is cue leads to behavior leads to reward. Now, a cue is something that starts the habit. The behavior is what you actually do, and the reward is what you get from doing it. Of course, it goes without saying that the reward doesn't have to be something grand or exciting. It can be simple things, little things like relief, comfort, or a distraction. For example, with my nail biting, I might feel very stressed and I start biting my nails because of that, and then I would feel slightly calmer or distracted. If that happens over and over again, my brain starts connecting the nervous feeling with nail biting. So eventually, I might just start doing it without really thinking about it. There is also a part of the brain called the basal ganglia, and that basically helps us learn repeated behaviors. As we practice like XYZ over and over again, the brain gets better at doing XYZ automatically. That's why a habit can feel like it's happening before we've even made a proper decision yet. That's what I find very interesting about habits too. Knowing that you're doing something doesn't always mean you can immediately stop doing it. I can notice that I'm biting my nails and know that I should stop and I want to stop because I was wrecking it at one point, but my brain has already learned that pattern over a long period of time. Changing it means teaching my brain a different pattern. So, for a direct answer to this question, I don't think a habit is formed just because we make one decision to do something and suddenly become stuck with it. I think, really, it happens through repetition. The more often we repeat a behavior in the same kind of situation, the more natural and automatic it can become. Hence, how habits form. So now that we've established this kind of foundation of how habits form to begin with, let's ask the second question of today's episode. If we know for sure that a habit is bad for us, then why do we keep doing it? This is where habits become much more interesting than simply saying, I should have more self-control, so I should stop doing XYZ. If I already know that biting my nails isn't good for me, then theoretically speaking, knowing that should be enough to stop it. But it isn't always that simple. The part of my brain that understands the long-term consequence isn't the same part that's responding to that immediate urge. One reason for this is that habits give us an immediate reward. The reward can be very small, but our brain still notices it. With nail biting, for example, I might feel really nervous, stressed, uncomfortable, or just bored, and biting my nails gives me something to do. The feeling I get immediately can be a lot stronger than the thought of something bad to my nails that might happen later. My brain, in other words, is responding to what feels useful right now in the present moment. And right now, like not literally right now, but at that time, I was tempted to bite my nails, so I did that instead of thinking about what happens in the long term. This connects to Aristotle's idea of agrasia, which is often translated as weakness of will. Aristotle was interested in situations where someone knows that the better choice is there, but still chooses something else. He discusses this in Nicomachean Ethics, where he asks how a person can understand what they should do, but fail to act according to that understanding. I think this fits habits pretty well, because the problem isn't always that we don't know better. I think just from our common sense, we can kind of tell that biting our nails is bad, procrastination is bad. We can kind of associate these things with bad outcomes, and sometimes we saw those outcomes happen before. Sometimes we know exactly what we should do. The hard part, though, isn't knowing that something is bad, because that's just something we can look up. But the difficult part is usually getting our actions to match what we already know. I can think I should stop biting my nails and really mean it, but I still find myself doing it 5 minutes later. Aristotle's ideas also made me think about the difference between knowing something and practicing something. As I said in prior episodes, I think it does really apply here, which is that he believed that our character develops through repeated actions. We become the kind of person we are, partly because of what we repeatedly choose to do. If we repeatedly practice good behavior, it becomes a lot easier and more natural, and maybe even a part of us. The same process can happen with behaviors we want to change. And this means that habits can affect more than one individual moment. Every time I repeat a behavior, I'm making that a little bit more familiar. Over time, those repeated choices can become part of the way I naturally respond to certain situations. At the same time, though, I don't think that means we're permanently stuck with our habits. If a habit can become stronger through repetition, then a different behavior can also become stronger through repetition. The difficult part is just that the old habit already has years of practice behind it. So, I feel like the mistake that I made when it came to biting my nails was just saying like, oh, I know this is bad, so naturally it's just gonna go away. So, in other words, I just told myself to stop. But I feel like that's not the first step. It's noticing the moment when the habit even begins in the first place. If I can kind of recognize, at least to a certain extent, that I'm nervous and I'm about to bite my nails because of that, there is a small space, like even if it's for 1 second, between the feeling and the action. I can start practicing a different response in that space. And practicing that for multiple times might even lead to a different outcome. That brings me back to the question I started with. We keep doing habits we know are bad because knowing what is better and actually doing what is better are two very, very different things. Changing a habit is really more so about giving your brain enough new experiences instead of just understanding the problem. Understanding the problem, as many sayings say, is half of it, but there's still the other half left. So it's about giving your brain new experiences so that a different response eventually becomes easier too. This is where habits start raising a much bigger question. How much control do we really have over what we do? We usually assume that if an action comes from us, then we choose it. But as we saw, habits make that assumption really hard to defend. If I automatically reach for my phone whenever I'm bored, or if I used to bite my nails without even noticing, there is definitely some part of my behavior happening before I fully thought about it. I am still the person doing the action, but the decision doesn't always feel deliberate. So where does self-control begin exactly? This question connects to the philosopher David Hume. We discussed about his ideals in the last episode, but it does apply here as well. David Hume had a very interesting view of human behavior. Hume argued that a lot of what we do is driven by our feelings, our desires, and our experiences, rather than pure reason. We like to think of ourselves as people who carefully think through every decision. But Hume thought that our emotions and desires often guide us first, while our reasoning comes in after that. This idea becomes pretty true when you apply it to everyday habits. We might tell ourselves that we are completely rational people making careful and rational choices. But how many of our decisions are actually influenced by what we already feel like doing? Think about a really simple situation. Let's say like student Z had this homework to finish, and Z knew that watching videos will make them fall farther behind. So Z understood the situation perfectly. They knew which choice would probably be better for them, but Z just went for their phone anyway. Of course, Z doesn't lack the information. They know that completing the homework is pretty important and they already know what they should do. The problem is that knowing something and acting on that knowledge are two different things. There's a big difference between what we believe is the right decision and what we actually feel like doing in the moment. And I think that difference is where self-control is very fascinating. If our minds are influenced by our past experiences, our current emotions, and the patterns that we've always repeated, then obviously making a choice isn't happening in like a vacuum. When I decide whether to do something, I'm bringing all of that with me. The fact that I have a habit already makes one option feel more natural than another, because I did it before. The fact that I'm tired can make one choice more appealing, and the fact that I've rewarded myself with my phone every time I've been bored can make reaching for it natural or almost intuitive. None of these things physically force me to make the decision, but they do make certain decisions easier to fall into. This can definitely change the way we think about the phrase, just use self-control. It sounds like self-control is simply a matter of wanting something badly enough. But if that were true, then knowing exactly what we want should always be enough to make us act that way. But it might not be the case every time. People can truly want to change but still struggle to do so, and someone like Z can want to stop procrastinating and still procrastinate. And someone can know that a certain habit isn't helping them and still feel pulled towards it. So, maybe self-control is more so about like what you do once you become aware of what your mind is already pushing you toward, instead of having complete power over your mind. Because in this case, it's very hard to do and maybe even impossible. There is a difference between having an impulse and acting on it. Obviously, you don't always get to choose the first thought or urge that appears, but there can be a moment later when you decide whether or not you're going to follow it. That moment might only last a few seconds, but philosophically, it is pretty important. So, if we're influenced by our habits, our emotions, our surroundings, and our past experiences, can we still say that our choices are truly our own? I think the answer kind of depends on what we mean by free. Like, what does free mean? If being free means making decisions without being influenced by anything at all, then almost none of our choices would qualify, so the answer would be no. Everything we've experienced has changed us in some way or another. But if being free means being able to reflect on those experiences and sometimes choose how we respond to them, then probably yes, there is still room for freedom. It means that freedom doesn't have to look like a completely empty mind where every decision just appears out of nowhere, but it can look like noticing that I always do this when I feel this way, and then asking yourself whether you're actually wanting to keep doing it. The habit might still be there as well as the urge, but now you're aware of it and now you know. And that's why I think changing a habit can teach us something about ourselves. When you successfully resist an old pattern, even once, you're proving that the pattern isn't like controlling you, it's not taking the reins. But when you repeat the new choice, you're doing something even more important. You're showing your mind that another response is possible, so you're giving yourself the freedom or the agency to choose something else that could eventually become a good habit instead of a bad one. So, I guess the most important part of self-control happens before we even act on it. It happens when we stop moving through our routines without thinking, actually ask, why am I doing this? Maybe you feel a certain way, like you're trying to avoid something, or you're nervous, or just bored. Maybe you're doing it because you've done it so many times. But once you understand the reason behind why the behavior happens, you can kind of decide whether you want to continue it or not. So I think the main takeaway from this question is that honestly, we might not have complete control over what we want, but we do have control over what we do with what we want. Our habits can influence us, sometimes really strongly, but they don't necessarily get the final word. No matter how much, I want to bite my nails, I can know that this is bad. I can know that this is probably because I'm nervous at one point. And even though this feeling of nervousness is not the best feeling to have, I try my best to avoid biting my nails as much as I can, because I know the consequences that might come afterward. So the next time you catch yourself doing something you said you would stop doing, take a second and kind of stop and reflect and ask yourself, why did I try to choose this? Or why did I automatically go with this option? Because that understanding answer alone might be the first real step towards choosing something different.